Hi class, welcome back! Today we're going to talk about basics of Excel. Glad you guys are here. Now why does Psych 300 want you to learn Excel? Now one big important reason is that Excel is really the premier spreadsheet program, and it's great for a number of functions including managing your data, running some basic statistical analyses, making graphs and charts of your data, and so on. It's also a key office software in many work environments, so a lot of employers want to see that you can use Excel. Now, the good news is that by the end of these 2 weeks with me, you'll be able to say, I know Excel, to future employers, and that's pretty darn cool. In this lecture, we're going to cover the following. First of all, what is Excel used for? Then, what does its layout look like? What goes inside cells, what kind of cell addresses you can use, and how to do basic calculations. So even though it is only the basics, we're going to cover a lot of ground today. Now first of all, what is Excel used for? So you can manage all sorts of data. You can store them, organize them, recode them, manipulate them, what have you. And you can work with different types of data. So it could be not only numbers, but it could be currency, percentages, text, etc. It's very versatile. You can also make calculations with your data. And so you can run descriptive statistics, which describes data, so we'll do a fair amount of that. You could also actually test hypotheses, that's inferential statistics.
Now we're going to do that in RStudio this semester, but it is good to know that Excel, if need be, you can use also to do some inferential statistics.
You can also visualize data, so make charts and so on. You can draft tables. That's a sort of a somewhat little known secret that you can maybe draft APA style tables starting in Excel and transfer them over to Word. And that can make life easier sometimes. Now to illustrate some of these points, let me show you a couple of Excel workbooks. So Excel files are oftentimes called Excel workbooks. Let me show you a couple of them that I've used in real life. Ta-da! So here's an example of a workbook that shows data that you might get from administering surveys to individuals. So this is actually a data set of 30 individuals, and they responded to a bunch of questionnaires, and here are their responses. And so here's one example. And here's another workbook example. This is a little bit more intense, and this is actually something that I've used to draft figures for a journal publication. And so they wanted the figure in black and white, so you have something like this. But I've made all sorts of different calculations in the background, and then using that data, I've been able to generate this chart. Now you don't have to necessarily work in black and white. You can certainly try graphing things in color as well. So this is a rather involved, but a real-life example of an Excel workbook in action. Now here's a little bit of a tidbit. So you can type data into Excel yourself. You could also copy and paste the information into Excel, but Excel itself can actually read all sorts of different data files that you may already have. And a way to do that would be to go to File, File tab, and then go to Open, select Computer, and then go look for your folder where your data files are saved. Now when you go to the Open dialog, you can actually use this little corner drop-down menu, and you can select all files or the kind of file that you may have, and then ask Excel to just read it in. Some of the common file types you can read in, of course you can open up Excel workbooks. You can also open up comma separated values or .csv files or some text files. And so there are many options for creating your Excel workbook. So now that we've covered what Excel is used for and gone over some background information, let's take a look at its layout. When you open up Excel, you should see the workbook kind of appear like this. And so let's take a little tour together, and let me show you some of the basic things that you want to know about this entire layout. Alright, so welcome to Excel everyone. So kind of going top down, if you look at the upper left hand corner, you see the same old familiar tabs that you've seen in Word. And so many of the menus are quite similar. And then some of them are rather different. And so we'll cover some of the functions that you'd want to know in these tabs. Now here are the cells, or the meat of the workbook, and so the innards really. And you notice that this little box says A1. That's because you are in cell A1. And so if you think about these addresses, these are kind of like, I don't know, maybe like Manhattan streets and avenues. And so you've got the streets right here, so there are numbers, rows really, and then here are the avenues, so they're all alphabetical. And so they will tell you the column and then the row. And so right now the first cell right here is A1, but if I click on a random cell, then it's O8, and so that's the cell address. It'll tell you where you are in case you get lost. Now if you type in some content, then you see it also appear here. This is the formula bar, and so what it's there for is that it tells you what is inside the cell, because sometimes if you make calculations of things, what you see over here in the cell will not be the same as what you will see over here, which tells you how you calculated that number. And so this tells you, the formula bar tells you what the real content you've typed into that cell would be. This will make a little bit more sense once we start making calculations and so forth. And if you keep going down to the area over here, it says sheet 1, and so workbook can contain any number of sheets. And so you can just kind of go, keep on adding sheets, and so here are new sheets. You can just have all sorts of different stuff going on, very exciting. And if you click on the right mouse button, then you get this delightful menu that will allow you to do all sorts of different things to your sheets. Wonderful. Now, over here in the lower left-hand corner, you might notice that it says ready. Now it tells you the status of what Excel is doing, and so right now it's sitting for you to do things with it. Just waiting there, being ready. If you ask Excel to do a bunch of operations and things like that, then the status might change, and so Excel might let you know, hey, wait a minute, I'm thinking, hold on, or whatever it says. I'm pretty sure that it doesn't say that though. And then over here on the right hand side, then you get the zoom and different kinds of views. So, you know, if you really wanted to zoom in and get close, you can keep on zooming in, zoom out, so on. And then you can try different kinds of views right here. So I've listed some of the basic areas of your interface right here, so that you've got the tabs, you've got the cells, and then you can tell the cell address right here. You can read its contents in the formula bar. You can play around with worksheets, check out Excel's status, how is it doing, and then also change your view. And so these are some of the major areas you'd want to know. So coming back to Excel, in general, some of the easiest ways to move around would be to use your arrow keys. And so right now I'm hitting my right arrow, going down arrow, left arrow, and so on. I feel like I'm playing Pac-Man or something like that right now. Would have been fun if there was a Pac-Man for Excel, wouldn't it? Anyway, and so those are the arrow keys. You can also hit tab to advance across a row. And so let's say you're typing some sort of data. And so hello tab class tab, how are you? So I'm advancing by hitting the tab. Then you can hit return to go down a row. Excel will generally try to guess where you're going. And so currently, Excel thought that I want to go to column A of the next row, and so it's actually probably correct. But you can hit return to go down the rows. And so those are ways to get around. You can also select multiple cells by just using your mouse. You can just select by holding down your left button on the mouse and just select cells like this. You can alternatively also use your arrow keys, but hold down shift and you can do the same thing. So I'm holding down shift as I hit my arrow keys, and you can select a bunch of cells that way. Now let's say that you want to select a lot of data though. Then let's take a look at the different workbook, shall we? So we've seen this one before. Then you can actually click on whole columns and whole rows just by clicking on the letter or the number that represents that area. So you can do that. You can also hold down your left mouse button to select more columns or more rows. So very handy. Now let's say that you want to actually select the entire spreadsheet, and then you can do that by clicking on this tiny little upper left hand corner of the cell area, and then you've selected the entire sheet, which can come in handy if you wanted to change something about it wholesale. Ta-da! and so on. Now in terms of adding or removing information and so on with spreadsheets, it's very similar to what you've seen in Microsoft Word with tables. And so let's say that you wanted to see, so over here in the first row are essentially variable information. What question or what variable are the data for? And so you can actually, so this is actually a long line. How many languages do you speak? You can actually place your cursor between columns H and I to get that little double arrow icon again, and then double click to resize. So you can do that. You can also ask Microsoft Word to wrap text, in which case it will help you wrap text. So let me just resize that. So poof. So if you do wrap text, then it'll just place it on the next line within the same cell. And so you don't have to worry about resizing and making all of these really long columns, which is always nice, right? So you can technically play around with wrapping text. Now let's say that you wanted to add a column between G and H. Then you can select H and just click on Insert right here to get a new column. Similarly, you can just click on a row below and then click on Insert to get a new row. If you have the rows and columns highlighted, then you can also insert sheet rows or insert sheet columns. It's not highlighted right now because I'm on a row, but you can actually use this tiny little button right here under the word Insert to also specify what you want Excel to enter. And of course, by the same token, you can also delete that information as well. Alright, so now you know quite a bit about how to get around in Excel. That's pretty exciting. And so now let's talk about how to work with contents of cells. So coming back to Excel, when you look at the contents of all these cells, you can see that it could be text, it could be numbers, you can have different kinds of text even in one column. Now, for the sake of our work together, let's imagine that you wanted to create subject ID number for these 30 participants. And so you might actually insert a variable called subject ID number. And so here's a new column, and then let's say this is subject ID number. And you want the subject ID number to be 3 digits. And so starting with, let's say the first participant is assigned the number 001, next participant 002, and so on. Now, so let's imagine that and start typing that in. What is going on? Oh no, so it says 1, 2, 3, 4, but you want 3 digits. This is not cool, Excel. How could you do that? Come on now. Now, what Excel did is to assume that you're typing in numbers, so you typed in 001, and Excel wanting to be helpful, it just said, okay, fine enough. You just meant this, right? Well, I didn't though. And so something that you would need to do in this case is to tell Excel what kind of information is actually in that cell. So let's say that I wanted to tell Excel this is actually going to be, so here's a place where if you go to this drop-down menu, you can just tell it its format. Okay, let's make it text. So it's actually not numbers that you do calculations with. It's actually a label. It's a text. And so poof, did you notice what happened? So all of a sudden information moved over to the left-hand side of the cell. That's how Excel differentiates between text and numbers. So you can notice that all the numbers are on the right-hand side, right aligned, and then a text is left aligned. So you can see that example here. So text is left-hand side, numbers are on the right. In this case though, right now I designated this information as text. And so now I can go back and say it is supposed to be 001, thank you, and 002, thank you, and so on. Now, Excel still wanting to be quite helpful, like maybe like a mother who is concerned and really wants to be helpful, flags these and gives you what's called a little smart tag that appears right here if you click on that cell. And it tells you, would you like to convert that to number, would you like to ignore error, and so on. So you can tell Excel what to do. In this case, I would tell it to just ignore the error. It's okay. It's okay. And so now Excel knows that's all right. But you can see that little flags come up if you go to those cells. And so some nifty little trick is if you highlight a bunch of information in a pattern and then just click on this little lower right hand corner that has a little square to it and drag that square, then it kind of predicts what you want it to do. So did you see how you recognize that they have a pattern of 001, 002, 3, and so on. So it just kind of extrapolated and thought, yeah, maybe you would like to continue numbering like that. So Excel is quite smart. And so there you have it. You've got the subject ID numbers. Now just a little bit more on cell contents in Excel. So let's imagine that you're working with numbers like this, and you wanted to play around with the decimal places. Excel actually gives you a handy tool right here. So right below where you adjusted the cell type, you can actually increase or decrease decimals by clicking on these buttons. And so, for example, maybe you want to increase decimal places or decrease them, and Excel can help you do that. Now this also comes in quite handy when you have to round numbers. And so, for example, oftentimes in the latter parts of the course, I'll be asking you to round numbers to the 100th place. And maybe you want Excel to do that legwork for you, in which case you can increase or decrease decimal places and get that done. So for example, let's imagine that this is actually going to be 60.158, and I asked you, hey, can you please round at the 100th place? Then you can actually go to that information and then decrease decimal, and poof, the rounding is done. Now you notice that what actually is in the cell is shown right here, as I've mentioned in the formula bar. But what you asked it to show in Excel appears in the cell. So if you move away from the cell, for example, by hitting escape, then poof, the rounding is done, and it'll show you the rounded number in the cell right here. Alright, so now that we've covered how to work with contents of cells, let's talk a little bit about how to use cell addresses. So there are two different types of cell addresses. One is relative and the other is absolute, and I'll cover both of them. Now, they're especially important to distinguish when you need to refer to cells in formulas. And so let me show you what I mean. Now, let's take the first example. So the relative address is the default in Excel. And so you don't have to do anything to your cells. Excel will assume that you're using a relative address. And what this address type means is that, let's say you have a formula that contains cell addresses. And if you copy and paste that formula to a different location, then the addresses contained in the formula that's been pasted will update to reflect the new location. I think it would make more sense if I could show you in Excel, so let's just go there. Alright, so coming back to our trusty survey data, let's say that we're working with this variable. So this question was, how far away do you live from campus? And there's the data right here for our 30 respondents. I'm just going to copy that into a new sheet so that we can take a look at it and focus on it. So I'm just going to copy this and then paste it right here. Here we are. And let's work with this. Now let's imagine that I wanted to convert these numbers, which are in miles, to kilometers. And so let me just adjust things right here so that we're not having some space concerns. I'm going to wrap this up. Let me say that I wanted to just put the distance in kilometers in this column. You can calculate this anywhere you like, but it would need to be in a new column. Let's say, so a mile is 1.60934 kilometers. Just pull that off the top of my head. I'm just kidding. Dr. Google's your friend. So if 1 mile is 1.60934 kilometers, then each mile would be that many kilometers, so you'd want to multiply that. And so here's a mile, and you'd want to multiply that by the conversion, which is the 1.60934 kilometer. And so there you have it. And so if you look at this, here's a formula. We'll cover this in more detail shortly, but it starts with an equal sign to let Excel know that you're doing some sort of a calculation. And so this cell would equal to, and then this particular cell, which is A2, times the conversion 1.60934. And then you get the equivalent in kilometers right here. And so A2 relative address is just on its own like that. And the beauty of that is that you can actually just expand that and apply it to the rest. Poof! And so what I did here was to just drag the little lower right hand corner to apply the same formula. So instead of A2, if you move the formula to the next row, then now it's reading also the next row of data. And so the cell address, which is a relative address, got updated from A2 to A3 and so on. And so that's what Excel means by relative address. So you copy the formula to another location and then the address gets updated to correspond to the new location. So that was pretty nifty. Now let's talk about the other type of address, which is the absolute address. So the absolute address refers to specific cells, and it doesn't change if you move a formula to a different location. And you can tell that an address is absolute by the $ that appears before the row and the column identifiers. So here's an example, $A, $3. And now, because of those $, you know that this is an absolute address. And you can type in those $ if you like into the formula bar. Alternatively, to save you time, you can click on a particular cell that you want to create the absolute address for, and then hit F4 if you're working on a PC, or Command T if you're working on a Mac. And that should automatically add those $ for you and create an absolute address. So let's go back to Excel and see what that looks like and what it means. And so coming back to this example, let me actually create another sheet, and you can actually move or copy that same thing if you felt so inclined and create a copy. Let me show you like this. So now I've got another sheet, so I can delete this and start afresh. Now imagine that I'm now interested in figuring out for each of these individuals how many miles over or under the sample's average each person lives from CSUF. Now in order to figure that out, first I need the average. And so let me just take note and see what the average would be. So here's the average distance. I'm just going to write this as a note. And let's say that we wanted to calculate the average, so that's what I'll do here. Now we'll cover this next time, and so this is just a sneak preview. Enjoy. But here's how I would want to calculate the average. So I'm just going to tell Excel, here are the cases for which I want you to calculate an average, and there it went. And so here is the average number of miles that these particular individuals live away from CSUF. And now I want to figure out essentially for each person how different from that average their answer was. And so let me just call that maybe deviation, just a deviation from the mean. And so in order to do that, I want to refer to this particular cell, which is the average. And so I want to say, here's the average, and now I'm going to hit F4 because I'm working on a PC to make it into an absolute address, and say, here's the average, and how far away from that average does this person live? And so you get the answer over here. Now let me copy and paste that formula to the other individuals. Poof. And now, if you take a look, you would notice that only the relative address got updated, but then the formula is still referring to that average figure right here, and you can tell that by the $. And if you click on the formula bar, it just highlights the cells that it's referring to. And so these are all the deviation from the average. Now, what if you didn't do that though? What if you accidentally used a relative address instead? So you take this average, and then let's take the difference between that and the person's response, and so you have it, and then you say, okay, good enough, ta-da, and so you copy and paste the formula. Now, do you notice something that's rather funky about the numbers that you got? They're practically all negative except for that person with a 0, isn't it? And that's rather strange. And so that should clue you in, but of course you can just click on each cell to take a look, and you realize, wow, now it's no longer referring to the average, it's just taking a negative, so 0 minus that particular person's response, and that doesn't make any sense. That's not what you would have intended if you were to calculate the deviation. And so the absolute address, like this, with the $, is a very, very useful tool, so that no matter where you go, you can keep on referring to the same cell in the spreadsheet or the workbook. Okay, so now that you know some amazing things about Excel cell addresses, let's conclude by going over some basic calculations in Excel. So first of all, you might remember that you want to start typing your formula with an equal sign, and that tells Excel, watch out, I'm about to tell you something to do. And you can use basic math signs, so plus minus, asterisk for multiplication, slash for division. And something that's very important to remember is that the order matters. So there's an order of operations, if you remember algebra. Calculations are performed usually from left to right, but things in parentheses are calculated first. And there's a particular order in which math is done. So first come the exponentials, then multiplication and division. And then finally, addition and subtraction are conducted last. And so you might remember the acronym PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now that will help you remember the order of operations. You know what's funny? When I was growing up, they didn't teach PEMDAS. Now it might have something to do with the fact that I grew up in Japan though. Now kidding aside, let me show you a quick example. So imagine that you're calculating something like 3 plus 3 plus 3 times 2. Can you guess what the answer might be? If you guess 12, you got it. So what happens here? What happens is that first of all, the multiplication is conducted first. So that is 6. And then you add 3 plus 3. And so that would be 12. Now let's say that you're doing the same thing. So I copy and paste the same formula here. But this time, what I want is to enclose the additions in parentheses. Maybe I want to add 3 3s and then multiply that by 2. Now what do you think that will be? If you guessed 18, that's right. So 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9, and then multiply that by 2 and you get 18. And so as you can see, order of operations does matter, and Excel will take that into account. So you want to be quite careful about how you enter your formulas. Alright, so now you know all sorts of things about Excel, including what it's used for, how to get around in it, how to work with cell contents, and so on. Way to go! It's been good spending time with you. Hope you have a great day. Take good care, and see you next time.